I think if you guys saw the Google Meet or the invite, yak shaving, event automation, and the Fedora community is kind of what I call this. So I kind of already said this, but I'm Adrian. I'm the Fedora community architect intern. Also off this, there's a bunch of stuff. I'm a CS master student at RIT, pursuing a minor in free and open source software. I've been rowing since 2014, and I enjoy making things better with open source, encouraging industries to make open source better, solving problems with open source, helping the planet with open source, lots of open source. In case you guys are wondering from the meeting invite, what is yak shaving? To work.
Replace that light bulb in the kitchen?
What does it look like I'm doing?
I referenced that a lot. Go to the next slide. So yeah, basically yak shaving is repeatedly pursuing smaller and smaller subtasks of the thing you were trying to do until you end up shaving yaks in Nepal while still believing you're making progress towards the original goal. What does this have to do with my job? What even is my job, actually? So anyone with a little coding knowledge can basically start an open source project. You kind of put an open license on it, and your project can be used by other people. As it grows, kind of more and more people get involved, users, contributors, and as the number of people increases, there starts to be more kind of need to kind of organize that community. Like it's suddenly too many people to organize all at once. So you can start getting like subgroups kind of form. And if you're still a sole maintainer, you're suddenly going to be in the middle there, involved in everything, everything that's happening, kind of having to manage all the people all over the place. And now the maintainer's job has turned more into people management than necessarily code writing and the thing that they started the project for in the first place. And if you're incredibly unlucky, your project might be called XZ, and one of your contributors might be trying to sabotage you. So maybe the project kind of creates a code of conduct, add a few moderators to kind of help manage the situation. And obviously the community is still growing, so you'll want to communicate kind of what's going on to your growing user base. And then sometime sooner or later, you'll probably want to host some kind of event or conference, and you'll need people to manage that too. And Fedora is a really large project. It's been growing for 20 years, and there's no real single way anything gets done. There's so many small teams. Each team kind of decides what the best way is for them to work. So, I mean, this is a big diagram. It's probably pixelated because I think it was small and I made it bigger. But essentially, the whole left half of this is technical. So you've got packaging, like architectures, Fedora, like different desktops. And on the right is kind of more the people side. You've got like kind of where I am over here, kind of at the bottom underneath ComOps. There's also like outreachy, venture projects, like design. And then in the middle is Fedora Council kind of managing, like being the kind of single voice for the whole thing. So as a Fedora community architect intern, it's my job to basically help make sure the people in Fedora are taken care of and kind of all that is running smoothly. And a healthy Fedora community basically helps create a better, more stable operating system for the people and projects that rely on Fedora, such as RHEL. So this largely boils down to organizing community events, trying to keep documentation up to date, make sure there's people around to welcome new contributors into the community and help them find out something cool they want to do, promoting news events, new releases of Fedora, all that, and soliciting feedback from the community. So what I've mostly been doing recently is kind of helping with the event running side of things. So recently we had the Fedora 40 release party. So Fedora 40 just came out. And also, this last Friday, there was kind of a Fedora Week of Diversity, little virtual event. And as a CS major, I've been kind of leaning towards the automation side of things. So for these virtual events, I've been working on things like a matrix bot to help kind of help invite people who registered for the event into the actual chat room where the event is happening. And also been working on kind of some scripting and some automation to help take that live stream from the event with all the speakers and all the different things that are going on and cut it up, and so that it can be re-uploaded to YouTube as several smaller, like 15 to 40-minute videos rather than one 7-hour live stream. And then also Flock is Fedora's annual kind of community contributor conference, which is going to be happening soon in Rochester, New York. So I've also been working on kind of preparations for that. A lot of preparation that's already been in progress, but we noticed that there's kind of effectively 2 websites. There was a previous kind of redesign effort for the website that kind of was going along with some of the redesigning that happened with the Fedora main website, but it never really kind of made it into production. Like, it's not really the main site. So I'm trying to see if I can bring that over the line and finish that. And that includes kind of interviewing a bunch of users and stakeholders and just everyone in the community to see whose different needs, like what different needs there are and how the site can kind of accommodate all of that. So what does the activity have to do with my job exactly? So number one, there's a lot of things to fix. So throughout the various projects, there's just, as an old project, Fedora has like links to wiki pages that just contain outdated information, like information about bots that only existed on IRC when everything's using Matrix now. Lack of documentation for kind of newcomers, so kind of projects for like infrastructure things that kind of assume you already know how the infrastructure works in Fedora, when I'm kind of coming into this not really knowing what's up, or like where specifically to go to like access the OpenShift portal for this one like community instance for running things. And also, there's a lot of various teams I've been in chats in Matrix that have kind of been posting out there like, hey, here's a new thing for like some newcomers to do, it'd be really nice. I'm like, that's cool. I don't really have time for that because I'm doing several other things right now. And being an open source project, it's really easy to just go and fix things that are broken, but that also leads me often to find more things to fix. So it ends up being a rabbit hole of like, well, I'm working on this, but the documentation that I need to work on that is kind of bad. So I'll go and fix that documentation. And then, oh yeah, this wiki page, like it just ends up being a rabbit hole. Reason number 2, there's so much cool stuff to do. So like, once I have a cool project like the video editing scripts, it's really easy to kind of adapt it to new use cases and be like, oh yeah, I could use it for this. So for example, I was like, hey, I've already got this script to like cut up the live stream. Why can't we just use that to cut like little shorts out of live stream, and then Fedora's got like shorts content. So I tend to get excited about helping people. So it's especially hard to avoid like scope creep, essentially, if someone else is suggesting like, hey, can you do this new thing? Like, can your thing work for my thing? Instead of just me coming up with the use cases myself. So yeah, my internship has essentially been trying to learn to limit the scope and limit the yak shaving if possible. Projects are kind of never really done, especially in software. Scope creep is kind of forever, and eventually something else is always going to become higher priority. So it's just kind of learning to manage all of those things. And also everything that gets added to these projects, like it's going to need to get maintained into the future. Like my internship's not going to last forever. I'm not going to be able to keep these things around forever. So I have been learning that won't fix is my friend. I've closed so many of my own open like subtasks. I'm just like, I'm not going to work on this because it's a lot of time and it's not really helpful. So how I know when I'm done is when the project's good enough that something else is a better use of time. So up next, I'm going to continue working on making progress on that redesign of the Flock site, the interviews. I'm going to probably have my own little documentation week, just trying to document all the things I've done so far and get them up on the submit all the pull requests to all the places for the community docs so that other people can see and rely on these as part of the kind of standard practice going forward so that events kind of get run more smoothly, and also getting ready for Flock. A couple ways that I'm kind of seeking some help is I've heard in some of the interviews so far for the Flock website that there was some interest in like reaching out to people in other languages, other time zones, because Fedora is an international community. And I'm not really sure, like, I really only know English. and I'm on the East Coast. So I'm really at a disadvantage when it comes to people in Europe, people in Asia. Like the time zones are just so different. And there's like, I want to make sure that I'm not biasing it by like only doing it in English. So I've heard of people, some of the other interns that are in research, user research, would love to reach out to you. Also, I'd love feedback on the tools. If you think any of the tools I talked about would be interesting or useful to you or your department, feel free to use them. Happy to help you get started. And I'd love to make sure they're like really polished and really able to be used by other people, not just me. Make sure there's no gaps in the documentation. And also just mostly seeking help from my own team to help me make sure that I don't overtask myself and keep just doing random things. Yeah, thank you. Anyone got questions?
Sort of related, sort of unrelated. As knowing how big of a code base and a project Fedora is, like how do you get over that new contributor fear of like, where do I even start in this mess? And like, where do I actually pitch it?
Actually, I think I was actually in making these slides, I was actually trying to find like a large, like as for the whole kind of how a project evolves story, I was going to try and find an actual like Linux kernel or Fedora or like some big Linux project that started off as like someone's personal side project. And I tried 3 or 4 of them and I couldn't find one. Like, I mean, the Linux kernel maybe, but like they started off like 3 revision control systems ago, and like I would never been able to find the first commit. And so and I tried the same with Fedora, but it's really, I kind of learned that Fedora isn't necessarily one project. It's more kind of a collection of other, like you've got kind of each of the packages that are part of Fedora, and like each of the, like it's a large system of a lot of smaller parts. So you're not really looking at one giant mono repo. Like it's like with the org chart that I showed earlier, like you kind of, everyone's got their own little scope of what's around them. And it's a little bit more manageable than just being overwhelmed by a huge project. Yeah, I think that's also where a lot of like my managers and my team really is helping me like understand what all the different parts of the community are that I kind of need to pay attention to for the different things I'm working on. Does that kind of help answer your question? Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes. What is your minor exactly? Just
My minor is that free and open source software and free culture.
what exactly is that?
So it's essentially a minor in open source. That's a thing that RIT offers. I go to school in Rochester, New York. Yeah, it's essentially, I think there's a couple of the classes, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but yeah, there's a few, there's like, I think there's like a class that's like free culture that's part of that minor. I think one of the ones I actually TA'd for the humanitarian free and open source software class, which was like one of the first ones in that thing. So that's a lot of like getting people introduced to Git and like, hey, do your first like go find some project and just do a simple like documentation bug fix, like just to get familiar with that process and make pull requests, and just learning about how like open source, like it's not just the code and the license, it's also like kind of a way of working and like working in like, how do you work in public? Like, I think that's actually the name of the textbook for my class, Working in Public. And it's like what are the different types of open source projects? Like, is it like someone's small toy project? Is it like a federation like Rust? Like, is it just a stadium where it's like 3 developers serving like 500,000 people? Like, what kind of project is it? So it's a lot of that kind of thing, like essentially the basics of open source. Yeah.
I believe working with the community is one of the hardest challenge, because it'll be really difficult to set a definition of done for the things that you're working on. So how would you do that as an intern? And as part of it, can you also tell us a bit more about how you would actually quantify success when it comes to a new project? When would you say, okay, this was a successful project?
I think the way I've actually sort of trying to do it with Fedora at least is because I think I've had the benefit of, because I'm kind of doing all these projects for a particular event, I was like, hey, like the Fedora 40 release party was kind of like, that happened like a week or 2 after I started. So it was like kind of first time just like thrown in there. I was largely doing all the like inviting people manually, like just grabbing data, like CSV data off of the website and just throwing it in a spreadsheet and copy pasting. And then I was like, okay, let's kind of automate this. And then I was kind of able to then use Fedora, the Week of Diversity event that was coming up, and kind of say, okay, that's my target. Like I want to have something kind of ready and more automatic by then. And so I think I was largely trying to like, that was kind of the definition of done. It's like, hey, I need something that will work for this. So it's like, if it was kind of an extraneous, like random other like issue, like, oh, this is a nice to have for the future, but it's not really going to be helpful for that event. That was kind of how I kind of sorted it between what I need to do now and what to do later. And that also kind of helps, I think, with the definition of done. It's like, hey, is this bug affecting it? Like, if it's going to affect the event or not? So I think that's kind of how I was kind of largely thinking about it. Does that largely answer your question? I might have kind of had a long answer. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you mentioned that video editing software that like cuts videos up. That seems like a kind of machine learning task. Was that, how did you end up approaching that?
So actually I was largely building on, there's already, I think from previous, because Fedora releases every 6 months. So there's like a release party every 6 months. I think from previous release parties, like there's like, I think one of the previous couple, like it took a few months to edit the videos and re-upload them. And I think as a result of that, one of the community members, like one of the people working on the Fedora project, went and documented like, hey, here's a standard process for how we do this. And I think it largely went something like either during or after the event, you like tag the like breaks in between each, like as they're switching speakers, or hey, we're going to take a 30-minute break for you to go get coffee. Tag those in sponsor block. So it's like tag it as an intermission. And then what you can do, you can export those timestamps from sponsor block, reformat them very slightly, put them back in the YouTube description so that it'll generate, like it'll have the chapter markers for you. And then you can use YouTube DL, which is like I mean, most of you probably heard of it, for downloading open source script for downloading stuff off YouTube. And you can have it download that, automatically skip the breaks and things, and then also automatically cut the video up by those chapters. So it's actually like, you don't even need, like, it's completely non-AI. Like it's like, I mean, there is kind of a human step where you have to go in and tag it, but then it's like, you kind of do it once, and then that's like, the rest of it's kind of automated from there.
You mentioned one of your biggest challenges is to limit the scope. And how do you excel on limiting scope? So how do you decide like which has more priorities? Because a lot of the tasks seems to me are a lot of ad hoc tasks and like non-repetitive.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, it was kind of, I think I've been kind of leaning on the fact that it's like an event. It's like, hey, is this like is this something that I need to do before this event or not? So it's not, I guess the scope, I guess is still growing, but it's like, hey, do I it kind of determines like, do I do this now, or do I like file it as an issue on the repository and just like have it as like, hey, future idea, I'm gonna put this over here and maybe I get time for it later. So I think if I do decide like not to do something, I'll at least try and document it. So like if someone else finds that thing cool, they can like add it. Or like there could be a community discussion of, do we even need this? That was also kind of probably around that answer. Does that kind of help?
Yeah. Do you believe there is a difference when it comes to community engagement in terms of open source projects when we compare that with proprietary products? Like, for example, Windows will have its own community, right? So do you believe there is a difference when it comes to community engagement there, or do you believe all of them are the same because people just use products or projects?
I feel like there probably is a difference. Yeah, with like, I feel like open source communities tend to be a lot more involved because it's like there's that access to so like people in the Fedora community can go and see the code for, if there's code related to the thing they're working on. Like it's all out there, it's all public. Whereas I think, while Windows might have a community, I feel like that's almost more like Microsoft's really leading that, and it's like maybe you're running insider build of Windows and submitting feedback, but it's sort of very one-sided. It seems like. I mean, I've been running Linux for many years, so maybe I'm slightly mischaracterizing the Windows side of things, but like the Windows community doesn't really necessarily have access to the Windows source code, so it's kind of hard. Like it's like all the work, all of it, the responsibility is kind of on Microsoft, whereas it's kind of with something like Fedora, it's more like anyone can step up and take responsibility. Like if they're like, hey, I really like, I've been super annoyed. I think actually one of the recent a recent issue that's been happening with Fedora, I guess some of the latest kind of rawhide, like just rolling really super bleeding edge builds, or maybe Fedora 40, I forget. There's been some issues with like accessibility in the installer. So it's like people with screen readers are having a hard time like installing the OS. And so it's like, obviously that can be a pretty major issue for some people. And so they can kind of, anyone in the community can kind of raise that flag and, or even work on it themselves if they wanted to.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I think
We're at time.
all right. Thanks a lot.